From the twisted realm of science and the darkest pits of reason comes chilling tales of godlessness. Bear witness to the unfathomable terror that is the Good Atheist.
Ryan and I decided that we were going to go back to the gym seriously because you know what? When you're a blogger...
Because we do everything together.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Well, not everything. I do thankfully have a girlfriend. But
we do her together as too.
Ew. That would be horrible. No offense. So we decided that we were going to get back in shape because you know what? Sitting on your computer all day blogging is a pretty good way to become, I don't know, big fat guy.
Yeah, it's a recipe for a heart attack. And now that it's nice and warm outside, there's nothing better than going out and doing a bit of exercise and everything like that. I encourage everybody out there to do it, because if you're going to think logically about it and rationally, it's all atheists, all good atheists do.
Yeah.
You will realize that what's the point of anything if you don't have your health? Your existence is all you have.
It's
fools.
really, it's so true. It's so true. I mean, you know what? One of the things that I noticed, I mean, when I quit my job and started doing this thing full time, doing that and Fight Linker full time, I mean, I used to before I was just working at home. I was working in an office, but 3 times a week minimum, I was always going to the gym, and I was in pretty good shape. And 6 months has a way of kicking your ass. You know, especially when you do a job that's very not physical.
Yeah.
Typing on the keyboard, being a keyboard warrior.
Now, I want to ask you a religious-related question about heaven and fitness.
Heaven and fitness.
If you're a big fat piece of shit and you die and go to heaven, are you still a big fat piece of shit, or are you like restored to your godly continence?
Well, you know, it's a funny question because they always used to have like a lot of discussions about that, particularly actually how to deal with amputees and other people with physical deformities,
and dogs and cats and everything, all the other things that you need to make you happy, like fitness and limbs and your animals and your possessions. Well,
at some point I remember that there were a number of animals that were excommunicated by the church. One of these was actually a woodworm. You want to know why the woodworm was excommunicated?
Because it was like damaging crops, I imagine?
No, it was a funnier reason. Is because there was this pontiff, like a cardinal, who sat in one of those, like in a chair, but it had been eaten by woodworms, so the chair broke apart and he fell down and he hit his head and he became mentally retarded. Like his brain stopped working properly.
And did he excommunicate?
No, he
the
didn't.
woodworm?
But the church, in response to it, had a debate about whether or not they should excommunicate the worms. But the debate was whether or not those worms that were alive and had eaten the majority of them were in fact sinful, or if they had inherited the sin of the original worms that had been the one to invade the wood in the first place.
Well, you got to figure if they're living in one chair, it is a family. It is a what's it called in the Bible? Like a bloodline. Like, how and woodworm 1 beget woodworm 2 through 20,000, and then those woodworms beget 10,000 more woodworms.
Well, this is why the woodworm was excommunicated, because it was found that the sins of the father were passed on to the son. So it was that simple. And, something similar was supposedly happened for us, but then Jesus came along and apparently made everything okay.
Sucks to be born, from 6,000 years to, 2,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Sucks to be anyone.
Well,
everyone's in hell.
Did you ever read the Dante's Divine Comedy, also probably known to you as Dante's Inferno?
Do I look like the kind of guy who's read Dante's Inferno?
Well, we have it in the library shelf. I don't know.
I'm giving the thumbs up.
Actually, part of Dante's Inferno actually deals with the fact that Jesus goes to hell and comes to rescue some of the saints that were born before he was around. So it was kind of like, it's described very tongue-in-cheek, too, at the time, kind of a thing. So, yeah, it did suck for those guys to literally be trapped in hell for 4,000 years. But apparently somebody came down and saved them.
So wait, is Dante's Inferno kind of like the Animal Farm of religion?
I don't know if I'd call it that. It's kind of its own thing. It's kind of its own thing.
But it's worth checking out?
it's worth checking out. You know, it's like one of those things where
I just don't want to read it and find out that it sucks balls.
No, it
there's
doesn't suck balls.
There's a lot of like, you know, Buckminster Fuller.
Buckminster Fuller, yeah.
Yeah, no, he sucks.
He was a genius, but he's a terrible writer.
Absolutely.
Dante was a good writer, though.
And
I mean, it's written as poetry. That's the whole thing. It's a huge like a book of poems, basically. So if you don't like poetry, stay clear. Stay clear. But personally, I read about a third of it, and I will admit it got a little bit long. I mean, I can only read so much poetry, but it was interesting to kind of like, because he goes through all the different levels of hell. So it's amusing to see his journey through there and how kind of it was interpreted at the time, I guess. But yeah, that's the excommunication of worms. So I thought that was kind of hilarious.
Awesome. Very awesome.
All right, let's start the show. There's one thing I wanted to talk about. I wrote this, so you should go check it out. There's an article about a man by the name of James Corbett, and he was found guilty of violating the First Amendment. And his violation was basically calling creationism basically a bunch of religious and superstitious nonsense.
Now, of course, you can get away with saying this in most situations, except when you happen to be a high school teacher.
Yeah, basically the suit was brought on by one of his students who complained, saying that he had some kind of anti-religious agenda, and that basically this was a violation, according to him, of the First Amendment, and the federal court ruled in favor that he was indeed violating it. Now, I decided I was going to
the teacher was.
So I decided, just for shits and giggles, I was going to go do a little bit of research and find out. Okay, well, why would it be considered a violation? As far as I understood, the First Amendment covered freedom of speech, which I'm pretty sure saying creationism is religious, superstitious nonsense qualifies.
Oh yeah, it's practically why freedom of speech exists. So you can say, so you have the freedom to speech that kind of speech.
Speech that kind of speech. I'm going to speech it. I'm going to totally speech it.
You totally spoached that.
I spoached it good. And also it deals also with a particular clause that says that, the exclusion clause, which basically says that you cannot include or give any favorable treatment to a religion. And it's been interpreted, at least more recently since the 1970s, as it also, meaning that schools cannot teach or give special treatment to religions. Yeah. I mean, the whole reason it was around, actually, is because until that time, they were still paying, Catholic teachers and stuff like that, giving them money for their schools, and everyone said, like...
dirty Catholic schools.
It's like, why are we paying these religious guys? And they lost a huge amount of income. That must have pissed them off something good, You're having a free ride for a little while, and all of a sudden they're like, sorry, your religion, no money for you.
Well, you gotta understand that all of this shit that's happened to all the religious people, this has happened over the past 30 years. They've seen a pretty serious slip in power. So when you wonder why all these people are so worked up to the point where they think it's end of days, and they got to push it along so that they can have the what the heck is that? Still, I'm fucking drawing a brain fart. That whole revelation happens, and then everybody gets left behind.
Rapture?
Yeah, the rapture.
The rapture. You forgot about rapture?
I forgot about the rapture.
I don't know how you could forget it. It's like the sweetest thing. You know what? When rapture if rapture was ever to happen, everyone would finally be like, God damn it! Oh, it's awesome. All the religious nut jobs are gone. It's like, 'tis truly a paradise now.
Yeah, but you can't have half of it true and them leaving without, the 4 horsemen coming down?
Why? Why does that part have to be true and all of a sudden the other part be true as well? I'm like, they could have gotten half the story right. Like, for instance, they're all raptured to hell. Like, as punishment. How awesome would that be? Like, they just interpreted it wrong. I think a person could write a funny story about how, pretty much rapture happens, but not for the reason everybody thinks it does.
There's a whole bunch of science fiction stories where basically who they thought was God and the whole, like, here's how you save the world was actually here's how you destroy the world. And it was one of those nice little alien tricks from outer space.
It sounds actually more religious than alien, kind of like in terms of storylines, because it does. The Revelations is one of those things that I think if you take it as being true, it's just one of those self-fulfilling prophecies, and you will bring about the end of the world just because you expect it to happen. You recognize that this is something desirable, so why would you not sort of like set it in motion? It can be interpreted that way. Why not? You're like, well, it talks about balls of fire, and nukes are giant balls of fire, so why can't I just, commandeer a couple nukes and get this fucker rolling.
In the most simplified manner possible, you could consider them to be that, but...
Well, obviously they always take this approach of saying, well, back when they wrote that, they must not have known what a nuke was, but they saw it in visions. I'm like, well, there are plenty of balls of fire. I'm like, doesn't mean anyone had any prophetic vision in the future. It just means that they're like, look, balls of fire are bad.
Yeah, 21st century didn't have the lock on horrible destruction, trust me.
No, the horrible destruction was raining down all the time.
Anyways, I feel like we're getting on a total side quest.
We are getting on a bit on a tangent. So basically, I was doing a little bit more research as to it, because it didn't really explain in the article why it was still being regarded as a First Amendment violation. So I looked a little bit deeper into the court transcripts. And according to the transcripts, the student had claimed that the teacher was pushing forward a secular religion in class. So atheism, in other words. So he says this is a secular religion. He's pushing it forward in class, and it is therefore a violation of the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. And they found that was true. So you remember those whole debates about whether or not atheism is a religion? Well, according to to these courts, it is. So I'm like, where's my tax-free shit, bitches? It's like, if it is a violation to talk about atheism in school because it's like it fails the Establishment Clause, then I'm a religion and I should be entitled to all the benefits. No? Oh no, apparently no, I'm not. It's all the negative sides of everything. So that's great.
How long ago did this happen? Is this just something that popped up now?
This is recently.
I just don't understand how stuff like this, you hear all this kooky stuff, or you have days where there's nothing really going on in atheism, and then you find out that there was a trial going on for several months involving a teacher who was just basically teaching,
who was doing his thing,
who was
doing how he described, because he wrote an article
on Open Salon, which actually is what you gave me, which didn't explain what had happened to him at all, but was very flowery, bringing up
Socrates and that kind of stuff. And I thought it was very, I don't know if he, at first I was like, well, you're comparing yourself to Socrates. It's a pretty high standard there. But you know what? It was well written enough that I could say, well, he was a fairly intelligent guy, and he's pushing people to think.
Yeah.
And the part that really pissed me off, and this is the thing that I wrote, is saying, listen, he was making a factual claim. He's saying that this is superstitious nonsense, and it's garbage. Now, creationism makes a claim about the natural world. I mean, it is religious at heart, but it still makes factual claims. So if you go around saying, well, this is false, then, you are also making a factual claim. He's not making a claim based on no information, or it's not a religious claim at all.
Here's the two things that he was talking about in the court case that basically had been brought up against him. Number one, he said that they were unhappy with how he had basically said that the initial people that had come over to the United States.
The Puritans.
Yeah, the Puritans. How everybody, they left to escape religious persecution, and they were nice people,
nice Christians,
nice Christians, and there's nothing wrong with them. And basically, he put forward that whole thing of, okay, well, if these people are such good people, what's up with all of the witch burning and everything like that? And apparently, that was considered to be anti or pro-secular.
Or blasphemous, or who knows?
Pro-secular.
Pro-secular.
And then the other thing that he had brought up was that he also challenged the whole Christian nation thing, which we have challenged many times before, and he wrapped it up quite nicely by showing Thomas Jefferson's version of the Bible, which you got to agree, when Jesus dies and he dies, that doesn't sound like Christianity to me.
No, that's pretty much the end of that. That's just like, he got killed. The end. They put a giant boulder in front of his grave, and there he remained. Well, the Jefferson Bible is the Bible with all the supernatural elements taken out. So you can imagine that it is not a very thick volume. It is very, very thin, because he only focuses on kind of like the moral teachings that make sense. Because if you accept that he's a god, his moral teachings make no sense whatsoever. You're like, you're amoral. You're saying that I need to believe in you to have salvation. That is amoral. I like this whole,
everybody gets salvation kind of thing.
Yeah, well, not just that, but also the fact.
Well, does it even include salvation? If you're getting rid of all of the whatever, then are you even subscribing to the whole heaven thing?
No, I don't think. As far as I understand, there's no real mention of that either. But I mean, again, Jefferson was a deist, so I won't pretend to know exactly what he believed.
Yeah.
All I can know is that from his from the Jefferson Bible, you can conclude that he was not really a Christian, no. And it's funny that he also mentions the fact that none of the Founding Fathers would ever get voted in because they wouldn't be considered to be true Christians. You know, it's like Obama, and everyone's like, he's a fake Christian. What? Can somebody answer me, please, what the fuck a fake or a real Christian is? Because none of you have an idea.
You got to understand that everybody... all religious people, not all religious people, but a lot of religious people look at other religious people, and of course, you know, the judge not lest ye be judged, but they just figure, you know, I'll just judge quietly.
Judge not too loud, yes, ye be heard.
Yes.
That's the better philosophy.
Yep.
Don't be too loud.
And everybody is always being like, well, he's a Christian, but how much of a Christian is he? How good of a Christian is he? And you know what? There's still a lot of people who probably think that Ted Haggard is a better Christian than many other people, a better person probably in general. And you know what? I'm not going to try and pretend, you know, that I know what Ted Haggard's like, and I'm not going to say he's a bad person because he
likes meth and fucking boys.
Well, not boys. He doesn't.
Well, young men.
Yes,
very young men.
How young?
Very young men. Well, let's just say I don't even think the guy was 20. So extremely young. Very, very smooth skinned young man.
Let's say something. If having sex with people under the age of 20 is bad, then let's not go there. Because I don't want to. I'm in a glass house. I'm in a glass house on that one. So right. I'm not going to make any judgments.
There you go. But you're a
shithead. Just because he's got like some confused issues about his sexuality, I'm not going to say he's a bad guy. He does definitely seem generally dishonest about everything, but I honestly think that he doesn't get it.
He creeps me out. Actually, his smile. Ew. It's just I always get the feeling that he's just something's wrong with him. You know what I mean? Like I just never liked his face. But I'm just being a jackass. That's just one of those I don't like your face kind of comments. So I don't like his face, but how good or bad of a Christian is he? Like, who the hell knows? I mean, do most Christians think that other people interpret Christianity the same way that they do? Nobody does. I don't think that there's two people who interpret Christianity in the same way at all. Like, they all pretend that they interpret it the same way, but deep down inside, the way that they either feel God or so on and so forth, everybody's going to have a different, feeling.
I had an interesting revelation over the course of the week about my atheism, and the revelation was that when you think about, say, the church and priests and stuff like that, you think about jerks and child molesters, right?
Pretty much.
When I think about the church and priests and stuff like that, I think about kind people who do good things. And unfortunately, that's not really the whole story with the church anymore, but that's still my initial feeling.
But I don't, here's the difference. I don't view that as something that is inherent to the church. I just view that as something that's inherent to people. Because, people, regardless of their religious creed, are still going to do things like, start charities, help other people. And I just think that's just because human beings are, have a great deal of empathy regardless of their religion. I would say they have a great deal of empathy sometimes despite their religion that doesn't often teach empathy at all. It's just that empathy is one of those natural things you are born with. You feel bad when you hurt someone. Say when you're a kid, right? And then all of a sudden you're being, like any other kid, really selfish and that kind of stuff. You grab a toy from someone, and then he starts crying. And, even though you're a selfish little prick, you'll feel bad. You'll realize, okay, I did something wrong here. And that's just an inherent thing about you. You do not have to have any religious creed for you to understand something as simple as human compassion. So I never attribute that to a religion, though I will say that, for instance, certain religions have been better organized. Like, for instance, Quakers were probably the most... 100 years ago, probably the most moral people that you've met because they believed in progressive work ethics, giving people fair wages and all this other kind of stuff. And those were great, but nobody's talking about the Quakers nowadays. Who gives a shit about Quakers?
Yeah, it's pretty
other than their oatmeal, I don't care.
It's pretty unfortunate that whole aspect of being... you know what? I'm not going to say that aspect of being a good Christian is gone now, but it definitely seems like it's no longer in the front. You're no longer judged as a Christian based on how much good you do in the world. It's all kind of based on just how visible you are as a pious individual. And I'm like, that's the bullshit Christianity that I fucking hate.
But here's the issue. I think the reason that that's true now is because Christianity... really, I mean, at the heart of it, if you want to go to heaven, according to, say, one of those, the guy Jack Trick who has those chick tracts or whatever, and all those fundamentalists, well, they tell you that it is not good works that secure your place in heaven. All right, you could save 1 billion fucking people, but if you don't believe in Jesus, you're still going to hell. And that's what they've been pushing for more and more. I mean, say less of this going out and trying to help the world, and more sort of trying to go out and spread Jesus. And that's been the switch, you know? Before it was like, well, we will do good works and people will start believing in Jesus. But what happened is that other proselytizing religion have put themselves out there, and now that there's a competition. I mean, Africa is being torn apart in between sort of Muslims and Christians trying to get a hold of over everybody. And it is battle lines drawn, people. Compassion to the side. We need to fucking spread Christianity. You hungry? You believe in Jesus? Good. Okay, here's a fucking chicken leg. If you say no, you get nothing. You know, this is the type of mentality that they have in a lot of these places. So, you know, we can't be surprised if the compassion is turned a little bit way down. And plus all those goddamn scams, you know, all those, you know, like
charities where 80% of the money just goes to feeding the infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. Like how many times did this happen before we started saying like, what the fuck is going on? Or another example, like look in the United States with prosperity churches. Did I talk to you about prosperity churches?
I don't believe so.
Actually, this will be a good segue. Prosperity churches in the States are kind of like those churches where you go to it. They're prominently black. And the prosperity church, you go there and you give money to these churches, and in return, you're supposed to find prosperity. That's their whole shtick. They're like, give, 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 give. You know, like they show up, and the priests have like fucking nice watches, Rolexes. And their demographic, unsurprisingly, is the poorest, least educated members of society. And you know, like the more they give, obviously, the less they have. It is the biggest scam in the United States is these prosperity churches, and many of the priests are like, you know, con men who've converted. I'm like, what a perfect con to go into. You're like, well, I used to be scamming people for, you know, with bad checks, but now I just started my own prosperity church, and I don't ever have to pay taxes, and I can just keep taking people's money and give them literally nothing in return.
Now, is there anybody, again, with the whole cast not, but is there not anyone in the religious sphere that's going around? You know, you figure there's enough religious infighting going on that somebody should be going around exposing these frauds. There should be nothing worse than a fraud.
The frauds are not being exposed by other Christians, you know what I mean? They're being exposed by, say, the James Randi Educational Foundation that'll go on and say, expose guys like Peter Popoff. Remember Peter Popoff? He was that guy that used to go around saying that he could hear people's like ailments, and then he was just kind of like faith. He was a faith healer.
You got him and that John Edwards guy, not the vice presidential one, but the one who could hear dead people.
Yeah, the one who, or Von Prague and all these kinds of people. They're hucksters, but they're not exposed by other religious institutions because what they're doing is so similar that there's no way they're going to talk against it. It's like, hey, Peter Popov, you stop asking people for money and promising that God will heal them. Well, guess what? A lot of people do that. They may say it sort of like in a more subtle manner, sort of like, oh, pray, and come pray here, and be sure to donate, and your prayers will be answered. But it's the same fucking hoopla. You're still asking people for goddamn money. It's just that the prosperity churches or the scammers are the ones that just kind of push people to do it really, really hard.
Now, these aren't the churches that are giving back into the community or doing
anything
like that.
Oh, God, no. Prosperity churches do not give back to community, although sometimes what they do is they have these really smart scams where they will say, okay, one of you will win this car, let's say. It's kind of like they'll do a big drive. And sure, a person will walk away with a car, but it's no better than a lottery, you know? And like, how many people are really, how many people's lives are going to be enriched by a car? You have a car, you got to pay for insurance, you got to pay for gas. It's a giant financial weight.
We've already talked about it. We can actually afford to buy a car. We just can't afford to keep it licensed and on the road and full of gas.
Yeah, I mean, you can buy a car for a couple $100, but it's going to cost you a lot more to just even have it. And imagine, like, you know, shitty cars. They always leak everywhere. They smell terrible. They're unsafe. I mean, don't even get me started. But like, my point about these kinds of churches is that, look, we're only secular institutions or organizations are denouncing them. And every time we do it, they just go back to saying, like, well, don't infringe on our religious rights. I mean, like, the religious people aren't even clamping down on that. They have no idea what to say because they do the same thing. They do the same goddamn thing. Anyways, let's move on to our next subject, actually. Talk about religion. I wanted to talk about Mormonism for just a little bit. You suggested that once in a while we should just talk about
A given religion, because for example, I have no idea. You can tell me this now. Are the Quakers considered? I guess the Quakers are a Christian subgroup, right?
That's right.
Okay,
that's right. They're basically the Quakers, or sometimes also the Shakers. They were just a branch of Christianity that kind of, like, the reason they're called Quakers is because when they pray, they do a lot of movement and that kind of stuff. But I mean, everybody, like, they were more like Presbyterian, work hard, and sort of like that's how you get into heaven, so on and so forth. So they were more of a good works oriented Christianity, but it's still Christianity. But today what I wanted to talk about is a little bit about Mormonism, because I posted up a cartoon in the 1970s that they made about Mormonism. And at the time it was kind of like one of those
were they running it like a Red Scare type thing? Watch out for Mormonism.
It felt a little bit like that, I'll be honest.
Well, I imagine America must have been very scared. Like, you go through the 60s with all this ridiculous violent protest, and then you have this new religious organization kind of in Salt Lake City that's starting to look a little bit worrisome.
Well, it's not just, I mean, people were worried about it way before. I mean, in 1838, there was something called the Mormon Wars. I mean, there were many armed conflicts, due to Mormonism. So it was a pretty serious concern. I mean, one of the main reasons why they did have armed conflict was because Mormons were at the time polygamists, and that was not really, looked upon kindly. And at they were a weird, mysterious new religion. People did not trust them. And what had happened was that they had killed. Shortly before the Mormon War, actually, they had killed a settlement of people going through, I think it was Missouri that they were at the time, and like they had slaughtered 138 people. And they'd done so disguised as Native Americans, but unfortunately everybody knew that they were Mormons when they did it.
Why did they do this?
Well, they just did it because they felt as though, well, they viewed the area that they were in as kind of like the Garden of Eden. So they wanted to kick out other people that were trying to settle. I mean, you have to remember, imagine at the time, all of this open land, but everybody's just free to come in and just make claims to land. Basically, you would defend that, right?
Basically, it's kind of like copyright and trademark now, where everybody's trying to stake their ownership over everything, and they'll do whatever it takes to do it.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the cartoon. Here's the thing. I mean, the tenets that the cartoon describes, like for instance, the fact that Jesus and Lucifer were brothers, or that Adam was a god before going to the Garden of Eden.
What?
I'm going to discuss most of these. Anyways, these are kind of like, there are a number of tenets in Mormonism that have been slowly abandoned by Mormons. And it's just because there's not just the Book of Mormon that describes Mormonism. There's two more. What's what I'm looking for? Tomes, yeah. Okay, the other religious texts include something called the Doctrines and Covenants, and another one called the Pearl of Great Price. These are kind of a collection of writings, testaments, and that kind of stuff that followed after the Book of Mormon. And
were they still written by John Smith?
Well, I mean Joseph Smith. Where? Basically, Joseph.
Shows why I need an education, eh?
Joseph Smith basically continued to say that he was getting revelations from the angel Moroni, because that's basically Moroni was the last of the neophytes. Do you want me to go back all the way to the beginning, or how far back do you want me to go?
It's all good. I mean, we can keep it kind of the general gist.
No, you know what? Like, I'll explain it in detail. It's the bonus show. People are paying money for it, so we might as well explain it in detail. Okay, basically, you have to think of that there is a planet far away, and that on this planet was basically Elohim, a god, and he had just a buttload of goddess wives, and he just started fucking around and getting a whole bunch of babies, a couple billion in fact, and it was kind of like a decision of, well, what do we do with these babies? Well, let's send them off to Earth, right? Then he asks kind of like his other sort of like fellow gods, one of them being Jesus, his son, and Lucifer, also his son, sort of like, all right, which one of you will go over there and be the leader, the savior? So Lucifer was like, me, and I shall dominate them, and blah, blah, blah. And Jesus is like, well, let's give them free choice, and I want to go. So basically, Jesus is chosen, but Lucifer manages to convince a third of the people that, you know, he should be the Messiah, and he gets turned into a demon, and so do they. So they just are cursed. They also become black people. They have the curse of Cain about them. And the curse of Cain is like one of those things. Well, you remember Cain and Abel?
Yeah.
All right. Well, when Cain was punished for killing Abel. Basically, he was. It's become to interpret by most Christians at the time as meaning that the mark of Cain is essentially blackness, and that black people were essentially the descendants of Cain,
a tainted evil man,
or Canaanites.
Yeah,
tainted or evil men. So basically, all right. So everybody gets, put on earth, and Jesus. He still dies and is resurrected, but he also is resurrected in the Americas, where he talks to the people that are there. And he tells them about the gospel and about how America is going to be the new Garden of Eden, but not everybody agrees, and they have a fight over it. And there's two clans. There's the Nephites that are supposed to be the good guys, and there's the Lamanites that are supposed to be the bad guys. Now, the Lamanites win for some weird reason, and God makes them all dark-skinned in response. They become Native Americans.
Uh-huh.
And the last survivor, Moroni, takes the golden tablets of what basically make the Mormon book, hides them somewhere in New England, where they're later discovered about 1,000 years later by Joseph Smith, who at the time was a soothsayer, and I think he was being regularly tarred and feathered, actually, because he was a big giant scammer. Anyways, this big giant scammer gets a revelation that there are these golden plates. And he actually gets them written, translated by somebody else who never sees the golden plates, but who, Joseph Smith says that he's reading them using magical stones. And the Book of Mormon is created. And all of a sudden, it takes everybody by storm. And Joseph Smith was apparently one charismatic dude. Good looking, smooth talker kind of a thing. And, it starts growing and he continues to make new writings, new declarations, that kind of stuff. Now, the problem with that is that some of these are really quite crazy. Then they upset people, for instance, here's a list of some of them. It's not all there because it's kind of difficult to find and to siphon through. Basically, they said that Adam was a god prior to being in the Garden of Eden. Remember when I said that they were all on this planet? All right, well, he was a god when he was in the Garden of Eden, but he was, sort of like his godly status was removed.
Is heaven considered a planet now?
Well, I believe that it is. Earth was the Garden of Eden, so and then it's because it's still parts of Christianity are still there. It's like the same mythology, just reinterpreted in kind of a different way. That's why it's so weird. There's also they basically they stated that, for instance, blacks and whites couldn't marry, and that no black person was allowed to become a priest. That was later repealed by the 1978, I think. Finally, they were allowed to be black priests. Though there were still black priests back when Joseph Smith was around, but actually what's funny is that Joseph Smith wasn't the huge racist that I thought he was. It was actually turned out that it was his successors which really hated black people. I don't think he actually had much of a problem with it. In fact, he was an abolitionist, so they called for that. So at least that's progressive. I'll give them that. Mm-hmm. But their views about black people is kind of pretty messed up.
Well, just the whole thing of black people are the evil race.
They're the cursed race. But get this: he even wrote that at some point some of the Lamanites had converted, and then their skin was turned white, so people could be saved. You could be white if you were black. You could be like Michael Jackson. Eventually, you'd turn white.
Yeah, Michael Jackson just forgot that he needed to become a priest before he did everything else.
There you go.
That was his one mistake.
There you go. Should have been a Mormon priest and then converted, and all of a sudden, boom, baby, you're white. And you didn't need to, have all that surgery and. Oh no, he says doesn't he claim that it's some kind of pigmentation disease?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what a fucking load of bullshit that is. All right, now the biggest, the most controversial thing that Joseph Smith ever said and did, this was actually shortly before his death, was that he had a revelation from Moroni, who told him that all men should have a plurality of wives. That was the big moment, let's say, for the Latter-day Saints, because right when he made that announcement, half of the people left. They were just gone. They said, okay, you know what, we were willing to follow you till then, but the whole multiple wives things, we got to get the fuck out of here. And it also kind of creates a huge amount of conflict with, the government, who's you're not allowed to have, polygamous relationships and that kind of stuff. And I must admit, it probably blew everybody's mind over there. But the whole polygamy thing, they got rid of that Yeah, by the 1900s, they had completely and utterly gotten rid of that, and the Mormons have been very careful to eliminate all the other evidence of these weird beliefs. Like, you'll go around, and I'm sure you talk to a Mormon now, and he's going to tell you that's not what we believe at all.
Adam's not a spaceman.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to tell you, well, no, this is not what we believe at all, and just read the Book of Mormon, and then that's fine. And the Book of Mormon is pretty much the abridged version of what it used to be.
The sanitized version.
Exactly. It is a very, very sanitized piece. So the Mormon apologists decided, well, let's make our religion more like Christianity, American style, which is marketing-wise brilliant, which is why there are more Mormons than there are Jews. So good on them, I suppose. And this is also why sort of Mormonism's on the rise. I mean, it's a highly proselytizing religion. And at the your understanding of Mormonism was probably something like, at the time, don't they just sort of focus on family, and aren't they kind of like family-oriented people and that kind of thing? I mean, they always do that whole, like, are you getting away from your family?
Yeah, I remember growing up on Saturday and Sunday afternoons watching television, and the Latter-day Saints would always have commercials about not telling lies. Because if you tell one lie, it leads to another. You never saw that?
No, I didn't see that.
It was creepy as hell.
Really?
A kid just wanted to go over and help his friend build a tree fort. And he told his parents he was going to go study, and then these guys came out and danced and sang a song. It was fucking creepy.
I only remember that they had this one, their whole tagline was, isn't it about time? And this, like, spend time with your family. Like, that was the whole... I never even got it, but I was like, wow, spending time with family. That sounds cool.
It's a good message. That's why I was completely surprised when I found out the Latter-day Saints are insane.
A little bit crazy, a little bit nutty.
But when you think about it, is there a better way to get your crazy religion out there and get some good press than just having an advertisement saying, hey,
we're all about family.
Love each other. Just go out and love each other. It's like, I can get behind that.
Well, I would say that probably the majority of Mormons consider their religion to be about this. Number one, purity of their bodies and souls. So they don't drink caffeine, they don't have alcohol, all the fast food, none of that shit. They're just like, your body is a temple and you can't put crap in it. So, I'm sure that there's like lots of health nuts that are like, if you're looking for a religion, Mormonism is for you. And, there's obviously the other aspect that we talked about, focus on family and marriage and that kind of stuff. They have this one thing called a celestial marriage, which is basically their ceremonies is saying like, okay, well, now you're married forever, which is interesting because the celestial marriage was used as a way to kind of make up for the whole polygamous relationship thing, because a person could have multiple celestial marriages and he would all meet these wives in heaven and they would still be his wives and there would be no problem because polygamy is all good.
So you could have as many celestial weddings as you wanted.
No. It's just that if something happened to your spouse, or if you were divorced, because the Latter-day Saints recommends divorce if you are married to someone who does not follow the tenets of Mormonism strongly enough. They're like, you need to leave this man and find someone who does believe, which is why, like Jehovah's Witnesses, people who get out of the Mormon church often say they will literally alienate you when you no longer believe. And it's that kind of thing. Like, their whole celestial marriage is, so long as you're both Mormons and you believe deeply, then it's going to be all good. As soon as one of you slips up, we will recommend to your spouse to get rid of your ass. Which sounds a bit like thought police in my mind, but that's how the religion rolls. So, I mean, it's funny too, because their whole commercials, they say, well, spend time with your family, but in reality, they're like, well,
spend time with the Mormons.
Spend time with your Mormon family. Forget about all of those others; they're no good.
Well, let's get into that. Let's get into like the look at the idea. We were crapping on Jehovah's Witnesses a bit before, and we crap on a bunch of other religions that have some cult-like aspects to them. What's up with Mormonism, and why is it worse than, say, any of the other religions?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily.
Is this the magical underwear? Is this the silly thing? Is that it?
I don't know. In terms of worst, I would say that its policy of alienation is somewhat worrisome, I would say. But I wouldn't consider them as dangerous as Jehovah's Witnesses, because of Jehovah's Witnesses' particular attitudes about blood transfusion and Christian science healing. Those things where it's like, well, we're not going to go to the doctors, we're just going to pray, and you're not going to get chemo or whatever. These guys are scary because they reject health and medical science. Like
the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Jehovah's Witnesses reject it, but it's not so much for Mormonism. I mean, I don't know too much about how your typical moderate Mormon feels about medical science, but I've not heard of many of them bombing abortion clinics and so on and so forth. They generally stay out of that, and I can respect that.
But they all live in Utah.
They all live in Utah, yeah, and that's why it's so difficult to get alcohol in Utah, for instance. It's a classic example because that's their attitude towards alcohol. They're like, alcohol is terrible and sinful and so on and so forth. And it's bad for your body.
What's your thought about an ultra-religious state in the United States where they just kind of live and do what they want to do? Are you okay with the idea of
with an entire state being run by a religion unofficially?
If the Mormons were just like, you know what, we represent everybody in Utah and we're just going to run it the way we want to, how comfortable are you with that?
Let's just say not very. Mormons are fine when they don't have any power, but I am afraid of Mormons having power because they have weird... There are certain things that I find troubling. Like, for instance, the Mormon Church has probably the best genealogical records known. Like and the reason they do this is because of a weird thing they do called, sort of post-mortem baptisms. So they will look at your lineage and they will go back and baptize your deceased relatives to make them Mormons, which pisses everyone off. Like going over and sort of like, okay, Socrates is now a Mormon and so on and so forth. And you're like, stop messing with the dead, you creepy bastards. But that's their whole thing, to bring everybody under the fold. You know, you can still be baptized when you're dead. So that's why I'm going to be buried in an unmarked grave. But yeah, they keep genealogical records of everybody. So they probably have some about you or me or who knows. Like, they have massive database of everybody's genealogy. So it would be very interesting to kind of tap into that. I would be curious.
That is hilariously intriguing.
Well, it's kind of like, remember I said Scientology had like this, huge database of information that they gather on people? Like, anytime a religion does that, it scares the shit out of me. Like, the last time that one religion had gathered a giant database of people was when the Catholic, Church basically handed over documents to Nazis about where Jews were, because they had a very good record of who went to their church. So if you didn't go to their church, odds are you were a Jew.
Damn.
And therefore dead. I mean, records can be a pretty scary thing. But I mean, I would just be curious as to find out, is there cool secret lineages that are available? Because they probably spend a lot of money and time doing these damn things. I mean, they consider post-mortem baptism is very important. Mm-hmm. Just despite what everybody else tells them to stop, they're not going to stop doing that.
So on your overall danger list, you'd give the Mormons what? Just like a 5?
A scale of 1 to 10? I'd probably give them a 5, yeah. Like, they're I don't ever think that they would be so mainstream that they would sort of overtake anything, but they're annoyingly concentrated in Utah. So if you live in Utah and you're not a Mormon, it's got to be annoying, to say the fucking least. You know what I mean? Like, they are everywhere, and they control everything, and they have that creepy castle. You seen that castle? Mm-hmm. It's just weird and messed up, man. It just looks like one of those evil castles that you'd see in a Cinderella-like story where the evil witch lives.
Yep.
It does not look like a friendly castle, does it? With those gigantic pointy moats, like it feels like if you were falling from the sky and no parachute and you landed on that church, you will be impaled.
You know what? It honestly looks like something that had the architect was kind of told, just make it so that it can withstand a siege, and don't ask any questions as for why.
I think that it was actually designed from the guy who made that building in Ghostbusters. It's just that level of creepy. All right, that's kind of like anything else you want to discuss Mormonism? Because I didn't want to go too much into it. I just thought we'd mention kind of like the funny aspects of it.
Yeah, we just go through it. I'm down with it. I enjoyed it because I honestly think it's important to kind of bring all the different religions out, explain kind of what they're about, and put them somewhere on the creepy scale, because I'm not afraid, really, of Mormons.
No.
Scientologists, I would never take an E-meter test because I'd be afraid
I put Scientologists at about an 8 or a 9 in terms of dangerous, just because they're fucking messed up in the head.
I would literally be afraid of going in for an audit.
Yeah, who knows what they do? Like, I've seen some of their brainwashing techniques. I mean, I could show you videos, and I don't even think I can withstand those. It's like prolonged, sort of like psychological trauma, that kind of shit will mess with your brain, like regardless of who you are.
Yep.
And they're very good at brainwashing people. So I consider Scientologists to be far more dangerous. I mean, anytime I walk into a Mormon and he talks to me about religion, I mean, I always get a kick out of it, and I like it.
You don't feel threatened or afraid.
Oh, no. There is no... I do not feel threatened. And unlike, again, unlike Scientologists, for instance, if you mention something about their religion, they get very defensive. They attack you. They'll try to take you down. They're very litigious and stuff like that. I always rank a religion's scariness as to their degree of litigiousness. And Mormon are only moderately litigious. All right, with that, let's wrap up the bonus show. It's an extra long show for everybody. 45 minutes, my God.
Extra long.
Extra long. All right, we will catch you Friday for the regular show.